Okay, so welcome everyone. Without further ado, welcome everyone to this new webinar of the Lamsa series. I just want to start by thanking Dr. Mkelzel and Lamsa as an NGO for giving us a platform in order to raise awareness about such topics. So basically today, our topic will be gambling addiction. So officially welcome to Heads or Tails, Addiction Tales. My name is Mark Bal. I'm a Lamsa ambassador for this term. I am a first-year medical student at AUB, and if you have any questions, I think you all got muted upon entry. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute, feel free to speak up, as I might not have an eye on the chat throughout this presentation. All right. So again, if there's any problem of connectivity, let me know, and we'll be adjusting that. So without further ado, heads or tails, addiction tales. So basically, this will be my outline for this presentation. We'll start with some introductory basics about gambling addiction, gambling 101, and then we'll be talking about the red flags, or as I like to call them, from red token to red flag. Then we'll be talking a little bit about neurology, so about the gambling brain. Then we'll be talking facts about gambling, so the rationale behind the random odds. Then we'll be talking about how you can manage gambling addiction. And then some final thoughts about the topic. So gambling 101, to all those who think this is an introductory class to gambling, this is not it. So I'm sorry to disappoint, but this is not going to be the case for today. So here we're going to talk about gambling addiction as something we would like to treat, something we would like to manage and not reinforce. So let's first start by some myths and misconceptions. Myth number one, you have to gamble every day to be a gambler. Obviously, this is wrong. You can gamble 3 times a day, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, not necessarily every day, but still be a gambler and still be someone who has a gambling problem. Myth number two, gambling is only a financial problem. This is not the case. As we will be seeing, gambling can affect different dimensions and aspects of your life, including your social life, your personal life, your mental state. So it is not only a financial problem. Myth number three, children are not affected by problem gambling. This is wrong. At this stage, when we have access to gambling applications on your mobile phones, children are very much exposed to gambling, even though they do not have access to casinos per se, but they still have access to to new forms of gambling. And these forms are usually unsupervised. So this is clearly wrong. Myth number four, if you keep playing, you will eventually win your money back while you are gambling. This is completely wrong. Whenever you are gambling, you have no certitude whatsoever that you will be winning your money back, the money you invested. So this is wrong. Myth number five, if you can afford it, compulsive gambling isn't really a problem. Again, this is wrong, since as we've seen, gambling is not only a financial problem, you are not the only person affected by your gambling, and it hurts a lot of aspects of your life. Finally, myth number six, problem gambling cannot be treated and should be accepted as is. This is completely wrong. And as we'll be seeing, there are many ways to be managing gambling disorders and many ways you can help people who are facing this type of disorders. Moving on to the key terms to get you acquainted with the topic. Gambling. I think most of you should know by now what gambling is. Gambling is the act of betting or staking, putting some of your assets with the consciousness of risk and hope of gain in a game that with an uncertain outcome. So basically you are investing your assets, you're betting on the outcomes of the game, and depending on the outcome of the game, you will be gaining more assets or you will be losing assets. Addiction. Basically, let's all agree that addiction is something that is compulsive, it is chronic, it is long-term, it is physiological or psychological need for a habit or behavior to happen. And this is going to affect you in more than one way. It is going to affect you physically, it is going to affect you psychologically, socially, and it is going to lead to symptoms. So it is not something that you should treat lightly. So combining both gambling addiction, or what the DSM-5 calls gambling disorder, it is the uncontrollable urge to keep gambling despite the consequences it has on your life. So basically, you don't only gamble recreationally, you gamble and it becomes problematic. It is problem gambling, and this used to be called pathological gambling. Some history, I don't want to bore you into a lot of history about the topic, but basically, Gambling has been there ever since the humankind can remember. So in the prehistoric era, it was already there in the ancient Mesopotamia, around 3,000 years before Jesus Christ. And it happened, people used to gamble with the equivalent of dice back then. And they used to bet on sheep bones or whatever they used to use whenever they were hunting. So this eventually evolved through the Middle Ages, where gambling became some sort of an activity for the noble class. They used to bet on events, on Olympic events. So this is something that was mainly seen or mainly associated with the noble class. So moving on to the modern era and the contemporary area we live in now, I think we're all very familiar with casinos, mobile applications, gathering between friends where people play cards and bet their assets. So this is just to give you an overview of how gambling was always there, not always in the same form, not in a constant form, but it's always been there. It's always accompanied the humankind. And this is something that we really should keep in mind. Now, gambling, I think we all kind of agree on what activities are gambling, what activities are not. But the way I like to think about it is by talking about two types of gambling, chance-based gambling and skill-based gambling. Whenever you have a chance-based gambling, this is purely based on luck. So if you want one example that summarizes it all, it's lottery. Whenever you're investing money in the lottery, hoping to win, that's when you are betting, and this is chance-based gambling. So the results are random, you have no influence whatsoever on the results, and you also have roulette, bingo, or even gaming machines. So all these you have no control over, and these are chance-based gambling. Skill-based gambling, on the other hand, are stuff or events that you have control on, and you can bet based on skills or on some analysis. So one perfect example about this would be gaming sports, gaming bets. So whenever you have some background info about the player, that one X player has more skills than the other, then this is going to orient your bet towards one outcome more than the other, and that's how you know it is not random, it is not purely out of luck. So this is skill-based gambling. So this basically, as examples of this, we see betting on races, playing poker, or even blackjack, where some analysis is required, where you can say that you have some skills in the betting, and that's how people call themselves professionals, when they have some background information and they can actually know what they're doing. So the odds of winning are not the same for all players, and the odds are always in favor of the house. That's enough about gambling 101. Now let's dive directly into the red flags. So from red token to red flag, when to suspect that a simple entertainment has become a disorder. The red flags. According to the Mayo Clinic, there are very specific signs that you should look for in your own behavior or in someone else's behavior in order to assess whether a gambling has becoming a gambling disorder. So according to the Mayo Clinic, let's just throw some around. Gambling preoccupation is when you cannot stop thinking about gambling. It's always on your mind to the point where you're irritated, you're frustrated if you're not doing it, if you're not gambling. So this is something that you always think about, and that becomes a problem. You gamble more money for the same thrill. So let's say you start gambling with a certain amount, let's say X, and then for the same amount of pleasure you used to get, you're going to gamble more and more. And that becomes dangerous because there is no limit whatsoever on the amount that you are going to gamble, and this is problematic. Like we've just said, feelings of restlessness or irritability whenever you're not gambling. So again, gambling preoccupation. Whenever gambling has become an escape for you to deal with your helplessness, with negative emotions, with anxiety or depression, this is also problematic because it is not a healthy coping mechanism for your negative emotions. Then one major thing that you should be looking for in people you suspect of having gambling disorders is lying about your gambling habits, because whenever people start lying, that means they are doing more than they think they should, and that means that the limits have been crossed. Then there's also the part where you jeopardize certain aspects of your life, like we've said. It's not only a financial aspect, it's not only a financial problem, but it also jeopardizes your relationships, your academics, your professional duties. So basically, whenever gambling starts to take over many aspects of your life, that's how you know it's becoming problematic, and that's a red flag according to the Mayo Clinic. So there's also social withdrawal whenever you're in society or in a group and you feel that one person has started isolating more, or they started to change around in society. This is something that you consider also as a red flag. There are some changes in personality that you should be looking for. So basically, you kind of get the gist of it whenever a person starts to change around you, whenever it's always around gambling or they need to gamble, whenever there is the slight need or the slight trigger, that would be a red flag. That's important. Moving on to the triggers, you're going to ask me, how does gambling disorder starts? So I like to think about it that it all started with something. So to some people, it can be a traumatic episode, the loss of someone, something traumatic happening to them, a major life event. This can be retirement, which creates a lot of boredom. So people start to gamble more to get some revenues, to keep on bringing money into the household, and that can escalate into gambling disorders. Negative emotions like depression, anxiety, or even other personality disorders. So these can really be the starting point for your gambling addiction, because this means that you have, as the start base, negative emotions that you are looking for coping mechanisms to deal with them. And this is how gambling addiction can become a problem, because this can constitute what seems to be like an escape for your negative emotions. The presence of other addictions have also proven to be things that come alongside gambling disorders. So being addicted to drugs, being addicted to alcohol, being addicted to having other addictions basically predisposes you to being addicted to gambling. So you should be very careful about that. Environmental factors, whenever you have friends who like to gamble, whenever you have a gathering and it always centers around gambling or betting or playing cards or whatever, this can be a trigger, because this can be a starting point for someone to become having gambling disorder. Even the use of some medications like antipsychotic or even dopamine agonists have also proven to be some triggers and some starting points for gambling disorders. So basically, the gist of it is that people start from abstinence, not gambling at all, to recreational gambling, thinking it's fine, which it is. But then, because of some predispositions, this is going to escalate into problem gambling. And this is the point we are really trying to manage and to stop. So basically, what we are trying to do here is to stay in recreational gambling to keep everything under control in your life. So moving on to the gambling brain. So you think it's only a pleasure and that it's spontaneous, it's very intuitive, it's very genuine, but your brain is actually into it too more than you think. There is a lot happening in your brain while you're actually playing some games on your smartphones, or going to the casinos, or actually playing with your friends. Your brain is into it too. It's a whole neuropsychological process that is going and that is happening and that you should be aware of. So let's first talk about the immersive experience that gambling is. So I'm going to give you the most typical example of the sceneries and the scenes you have in mind when you think about movies or James Bond going into a casino, or the slot machines that we've seen in arcades and stuff. So all of these, and it's very important to note, are specifically designed to create a positive experience for you and to keep you going and playing with these specific games. So whatever the context, it's an immersive experience that was designed to be like this. So whenever we're talking about attractive designs, lights, spaces, personnel, especially in the context of the casino, everything is designed to capture your attention and to make you curious about the process. So you're going in more and more. Step 2 would be whenever you start feeling with your senses. The jingles of a winning machine, the flashlights of a winning machine, the cheering sounds, the excitement, everything related to winning, what I call winning associated cues, are things that are going to take you further into this experience, further into the pleasure of the experience, are going to keep you more and more attentive and really curious about the experience. Then the reward uncertainty. I think we've all been at some point familiar with the rush of adrenaline whenever you're betting or whenever you feel like you're defying the universe. I don't know what's going to happen, but I want to try my luck. I want to see if I invest this amount of money, what's going to come out of it. So basically, the fact that there's this uncertainty, this defying this universe, there's something empowering about it that is going to increase your excitement and your adrenaline in the process. Then, one really important aspect is the fast pace of everything. The fact that whenever you're playing in arcade games, or whenever you're feeling like you're in a game, in a casino, or online playing your game, everything is quick. You lose quickly, you win quickly. And this is designed specifically to prevent you from thinking about stopping. So basically, this is what keeps you going. The fact that it's rapid, you don't even have to think about it for a second. Then there are also factors that also push you more and more into the experience, which is the overestimation of your chances, overestimation of the wins, and even the fact that you think you have control, you think you're empowered, you think you're this godlike entity that can actually gain and win all the time. This is not true, but everything mentioned here is actually designed to keep you hooked in during the experience. Moving on, the win is mine. No, the win is dopamine. You might think that you're the only player here that is in control of what's happening or what's basically actually going to influence your outcomes of the game. This is not true. You're not the main player in this process. These things listed in red. First, I think we've all heard at some point or another of dopamine. Dopamine, which is basically the neurotransmitter responsible for pleasure, which is released in the dorsal striatum of the brain, which is the reward system of the brain. What's really interesting about it is that you think that you only get dopamine whenever you get the winning result. This is not true. You actually get the release of dopamine before the winning with the anticipation for the result, which is called the gambling high. You get it after winning, which is basically the association of the reward, the tangible reward, and you get with it the rewarding feeling. So this is actually a very important association in your brain. And even after losing, whenever you think you'd be disappointed and with an unsatisfactory result, you even actually get dopamine released at this specific point. And this is something really counterintuitive, but it actually is the case. And this is what leads you to be chasing losses. Even though you lose, you keep chasing losses, you keep going, you keep playing. And this is actually one of the factors that keep you addicted and keep you going whenever you're feeling like gambling. So as we've said before, you have a very positive experience, a very immersive experience that is going to release a lot of serotonin in your blood. So good mood all around, you're enjoying your experience, it's very fun, it's very pleasurable. Then there is the risk-taking. So it turns out that there is a very specific region of your brain that is involved in risk-taking and that actually promotes risk-taking, and it's a supplementary I field of the brain. So basically, this is going to be activated whenever someone has gambling addiction more and more in order to risk take even more. So then there's something called a near miss. Whatever people start saying, I nearly missed my win. I was one case away from winning, one number away from winning, and this is a near miss. This usually creates regret and even frustration in some people. But thing is, this is not a regret or a negative emotion that is going to stop you from gambling, but it is going to do the exact contrary. It is going to make you feel like you were close to the win. You could have won, so you are going to win at some point. So you keep doing it until you win. So basically, for your brain, a near miss is not a miss. It's one step behind from actually winning, which is very interesting. Then caring about the result. Studies have shown that gambling and even gambling addiction is a very emotional process. You care about the results, there is emotional involvement, and this mainly involves the anterior cingulate cortex of the brain and the insular cortex of the brain, which are responsible for emotional processing. And there's also impulsivity and gambler's fallacy. So what's gambler fallacy? It's actually the fact that you think this is your interpretation as a gambler of the outcomes and your control over it. So this basically directly relates to the area of your brain responsible for being wise, taking wise decisions, and this is the lateral prefrontal cortex. This region of the cortex, this region of the brain is slightly less increased or activated in gambler addicts. So they are more impulsive, they are not aware, they cannot do proper decision making, and that's why they usually take part in more gambling and more risk taking. So basically what you have here is an imbalance between your emotions and your responsible and control system, decision-making system. And one thing that's really interesting that I found out is that Parkinson's disease, whenever you have Parkinson's and you take all these medications, you're actually more prone to engaging in pleasure-releasing activities like being hyperactive sexually or even becoming a gambler addict. So this is something we should really keep in mind. So that's this part related to science. I hope it wasn't too boring. Now let's think about it from an objective point of view. So like we've seen, it is gambling, the whole gambling experience, be it in the stock market, being in casinos, online games, everything is a perfectly designed experience tailored to match your needs as well as your temptations. It all makes sense. So you'd be thinking it makes sense for people to get addicted, but does it? Does it really make sense for people to get addicted to gambling? And can we put in some logic into it to try to manage and reduce this addiction among people? So basically, let's review the reasons why we would have empathy towards feeling towards people who have gambling addiction, because at the end of the day, it really is a surreal experience. It really is a lot of fun. There are big wins for you to win. There are so many ways to do it, online, in person, alone, in groups, everything. It's a great distraction from your negative emotions like stress, like anxiety. It's a good coping mechanism that seems to work for some people. You feel empowered because you challenge your luck. There's also this kind of glamorous experience whenever there's a social event of gambling, where there's suiting up, meeting up with more barmans, the red carpets, everything we have in mind when we think about gambling in the movies. This even contributes to a surreal experience. And even all the machines, all the elements, all the lights, the sensations, everything that is state of the art, that makes it completely understandable why people would like to gamble. However, here's the truth about gambling, is that your brain is actually very biased when it comes to big wins. So there was a study that was conducted actually that sampled people by presenting them with two choices. The first one, they're all listed on the left of the screen. Either you have 100% chances of getting $5 or 80% of getting $6.25. In terms of probability for this first scenario, it is the exact same. So whenever you give people the choice between a small amount or a slightly bigger amount, they're going to choose safety. But whenever you go and tell people, okay, you have 100% chances of getting $5, or you have 0.5% chance of winning $1,000, this is when it gets really serious and really interesting, because according to the study, 64% of people which actually take the risk take the 0.5% chance of getting the $1,000, even though it's the exact same amount in terms of probability. It's the same amount of money given over 100 chances, is the same amount of money, but people would still want the big win. So this is actually to tell you that your brain is wired to chase big wins, to be attracted by big wins. And this is something that you should keep in mind whenever you are gambling. So here's some truth about the gambling. So your near miss is actually just a miss, and this is something we have to keep in mind. It is meant to be that attractive. Your intuition calls you a winner because you feel you're empowered enough, you feel you're skillful enough to win the big wins, but you're actually not. Logic calls you a gambler. Escaping your troubles and using gambling as a coping mechanism is not something that you should go for, because at the end of the day, this is not sustainable. Even though it is pleasurable, it is not sustainable. And at the end of the day, it is going to hurt you on the long term on many aspects of your life, rather than being helpful in terms of coping mechanisms. So your money is not the only thing affected by your gambling disorder, and this is something we should all be keeping in mind. So everything we've talked about is basically how gambling disorder is bad and what can we do about it? What can we do about it, really? So basically, the point here is not to tell you that gambling is bad and no one should do it. There are safe practices to gambling, because at the end of the day, it is very pleasurable and it is very nice as a recreational practice, but it is not sustainable, and there are safe ways to do it. So how to manage? Oops, I'm sorry. How to manage gambling disorders. So here are actually things you could bet on and that are safe. So whenever you feel like someone of your close ones or even yourself is dealing with a gambling problem, the first thing you should do is be honest and sharing your habits and troubles, because the fact that you're being honest with another person about these habits, the more you're going to confront the reality of things, and the more you can be supervised and even helped and supported in your process of dealing with it and going out of it. Fight boredom and triggers. If you have emotional triggers at home, if you have triggers at your job or anything in your professional life, you should be fighting boredom and these triggers in a way that does not include gambling. There are healthy coping mechanisms. Going for a run, doing arts, anything that can take your mind off of things is considered a healthy coping mechanism instead of gambling. You should go for hobbies, try discovering new stuff you're into in order to fight boredom. Convincing yourself that to gamble is to lose, because if you're doing it with the hope that you're going to compensate for it with big wins, you are wrong. The earlier you start thinking about gambling as a safe loss, this is when you start growing out of it. Daily gratitude notes, be grateful for everything in your life, and this is going to help you reduce the negative emotions and frustration you get whenever you feel like gambling. Seeking help, as we will see, there are specific centers that are designed to make you feel better and to help you grow out of these gambling disorders. Medications for associated conditions. Like we've said, there are many addictions that come together whenever we feel like gambling. And whenever you start treating those different conditions, anxiety, depression, those negative emotions that require you to go and gamble to seek pleasure elsewhere, this is when you can actually start growing. And there are also peer-peer support groups that can help you talk about your experience, be honest about your experience in a safe space where people understand you and when you can actually pour your heart out. So some resources in Lebanon. So I have to be very clear about it. This is not an extensive list. There are many centers that can help you directly or indirectly with specifically gambling problems or addictions in general or mental issues. But the ones I found specifically relevant for our theme today, for our presentation, were the Reset Clinics, the Cedar Rehab Center, the School Lebanese Addiction Center, but also Ask Therapy Clinics. We have the Mind Clinics that I heard are great, and the Brain Station Clinics, which I heard are great. So there are resources in Lebanon for people who have the need to deal with the gambling problem. If you know people who are dealing with this, tell them about those resources. Tell them about that help is possible and that gambling addiction is not irreversible and is not a given someone has to deal with. There are ways to grow out of it. And now that you are hearing this presentation, you should be one of the advocates that actually help people fighting this addiction. So my final thoughts. Here I included some pictures of celebrities that actually went through the trouble of gambling disorder. So you have Ben Affleck, you have Shannon Elizabeth, Matt Damon, Charlie Sheen, Michael Jordan, Tobey Maguire, a lot of celebrities that you think are almighty, invincible, whatever, have also dealt with this problematic gambling, and this is fine. Because the point I'm trying to make here is that gambling addiction can happen to anyone. The triggers that can start a gambling addiction are there for anyone. But the thing is, having the money to gamble on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, to the point where it is unhealthy, does not make it right. So people, celebrities have sought help for their gambling addiction. And this is something we should be keeping in mind, because at the end of the day, it really can affect anyone and still it doesn't make it fine. So to finish my presentation, these are my resources. And I hope you enjoyed this talk. So if anyone has anything any thoughts about the topic, drop them in the chat. We still have 5 good minutes. If anyone wants to discuss anything, I'm open to discussion. And that was me when Heads or Tails, Addiction Tales. Thank you very much. So guys, this is it. If we're basically done, if no one has to tell anything, you can leave the meeting and to be totally okay.